Tonight, 100 days, but a century's worth of headlines.
Our golden age has only just begun.
Why the golden age struggles to find its shine. Plus, the self-described most transparent White House in history doesn't want you to know how costly their tariffs are.
This is a hostile and political act by Amazon.
Also, as more Americans grow frustrated by the Trump sequel, is I told you so the right tone for liberals?
White people, y'all really should be embarrassed by this.
And Pete Hegseth brags about getting rid of a woke program, a program made by MAGA. Live at the table, Van Jones, Stephen Moore, Ashley Allison, Cher Michael Singleton, and Tara Palmieri. Americans with different perspectives aren't talking to each other, but here they do. Joining us at the table is Kathryn Rooney Vera. She is the chief economist and chief market strategist for a financial services company, StoneX. Kathryn, we'll get to you in just a second, but Van, he said Americans voted for this. I would only quibble by saying he didn't campaign on 145% tariffs on China. That's a fact.
No.
And also, I think he and his administration seem to be recognizing that maybe there's a problem here because they pulled back on the auto tariffs today.
Look, I think there's a little bit of a bait and switch here. He said we're going to have immediate relief. We're going to have peace and prosperity on day one. I mean, he made a bunch of promises. Now he's switched. And he says, well, it's going to be short-term pain, which he didn't mention at all, for long-term gain. But the long-term gain imagines that by having all these tariffs, we're going to have all this onshoring at some point. When you talk to people who know anything about it, say it's going to take 5 years. And when it comes, it's going to be American robots getting jobs because it's going to be advanced manufacturing. And so I don't think much of what he is doing is what he promised he would do. And surprise, surprise, Donald Trump sometimes doesn't tell the truth.
And Kathryn, I imagine nobody is more disappointed than a lot of the folks on Wall Street and in the business community who they were optimistic about what Trump would do, and now they're facing uncertainty.
Well, there is a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty is what kills sentiment and the market. So yes, there is a lot of fear with regard to the economic impact that tariffs could have. Certainly they're inflationary, especially when you're looking at 145. I doubt it's going to end at 145. It's probably going to be markedly lower. But irrefutably, tariffs are part of not just a negotiation tactic, but a fundamental change, once in a generation, I would argue, in the global economic regime and structure. We're moving away from globalization towards deglobalization, which is inherently inflationary, but it's also a rejigging of the economic structure. I think anyone would agree that there have been massive imbalances leading up to 2025, both on the trade front, the fiscal front, and I think what this administration is attempting to do, and what the markets are skittish about, is to rejig those imbalances to come out stronger on the outset. So yes, I do think there's short-term pain. I do think there's a good risk of recession in the near term.
Let me play a little bit more of what Trump said in this interview, because he was asked about prices going up. You said a lot of it is inherently inflationary. Here's what he said in response to that.
Well,
nothing's going to happen.
You know business.
Terry,
I want to ask you.
Terry, I do know business.
Yes.
And
So 145% tariffs on China, and that is
that's good.
basically
That's
an
good.
embargo.
They deserve it.
It'll raise prices on
They
everything
deserve
from
it.
electronics to clothing to building houses.
You don't know that. You don't know whether or not China's going to eat it.
That's mathematics.
China probably will eat those tariffs, but at 145, they basically can't do much business with the United States.
I mean, as he was told in that interview, some people have called it essentially an embargo on China. You know, I mean, he's not wrong that I think in the first term, the much smaller tariffs on China were not entirely passed on to consumers. A lot of it was, but not all of it. But 145%, do you think China's going to just eat that?
Well, first of all, I do think, and by the way, I'm not a big tariff guy myself. I'm a Trump guy, but I'm not a big fan of tariffs. But I disagree with you a little bit. I mean, look, Trump did say throughout the campaign, tariff is my favorite word. So I mean, that was an indication that he likes tariff policies. And so I don't think people should be surprised. I mean, I do think he's doing exactly what he said he would do when it came to getting the border under control, which I think was one of his biggest victories, clearly, in the first 100 days. On the tariff thing, it is true. But the one thing that almost all Americans agree with Trump on, though, is China. whether you're liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, in this very polarized country, the one thing that everybody agrees on, China is the villain. They have taken advantage of us. And getting tough on China, my only complaint with what he's done so far is that I wouldn't have picked a fight with everybody at once.
Yeah,
I would have gone right after China, and I think the goal is to isolate China. And if you can do that and get trade deals, I think it'll turn out okay. That's a big if.
We agree. I think there's a lot of agreement on that.
When you're putting tariffs on penguins, you might have lost the plot. I mean, literally put tariffs on countries that don't even have
and
people.
Politically, I mean, that's exactly really to the point, right?
Yeah.
Like he could have had like a lot of political support going after China. And he decided to go after everybody at the same time. And the result is a disapproval rating of 59% for this president at this stage. When you ask voters how they think his policies are going to affect the economy, 53% is going to say it's going to hurt the economy. 60% say his policies will hurt U.S. standing in the world. 59% say it'll hurt their personal finances. That is a resounding indictment on this
I think
policy.
there's still an opportunity to turn this thing around. I mean, I understand why the market is a bit skittish. The marketplace and wealthy individuals have benefited to the deficit of the American people. They benefit from free trade. They benefit from these various imbalances that we have, particularly with China. So I'm not surprised, and restructuring this order is not going to be an easy thing. I mean, Van, you talked about how people are in this sort of economic deficit financially, in this level of uncertainty. There have been 3 decades of financial uncertainty. There have been 3 decades of people wondering when they're going to get an opportunity economically to survive.
Including the first 4 years of Trump.
We have not
that's a
seen
good question,
that.
Chair
And
Michael,
so trying
because
to
Trump has
restructure those things,
said
to
at the
me, I
same-
think is absolutely
in the same
fundamental
breath
and
that
important.
Trump has decried the trade imbalances, and I think that there's obviously a good argument about that. He's also said that the 4 years he was president were the best ever, and that Americans were doing extremely well. And you know what? Americans were doing extremely well. So, I mean, I think that there's a disconnect here. I mean, we can make broad statements about how trade has affected the United States, but there's no question that the U.S. has fared extremely well, even while some sectors have been hurt by some aspects of trade, and even more saliently, prices. Okay, let's talk about prices for a second, because the thing that Trump really won on was lowering prices, and I think there's still no word on when that's coming.
I literally have sat at this table so many times and just waited for somebody with real expertise in economics to just say, short-term pain and it will get better. I really thought you were going to say that tonight, and you didn't, because the reality is we don't actually know if it's going to get better.
It could.
It could, but
it may not.
But it may not. And right now, we also, Sure Michael, we sat at this table and you said over and over again that the people are saying they don't feel the relief. The people are saying that they aren't experiencing relief. And the reality is that they really weren't before November 5th, and we lost the election because of that. The people right now are saying that they don't think what Donald Trump is doing is working for them, and they are scared and they are nervous. Now, you're right. He did say tariff, 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 tariff. He didn't say he was going to disrupt the whole global economy in doing the tariffs. We can agree on the targeted attack. It is just the reckless hammer that they have taken to the federal government, to the economy, to people's lives. It just feels
Kathryn,
reckless.
I'll just respond to that very quickly.
Yeah.
Look, I respect all your opinion. And what Trump is basically saying, I want to let you know kind of the strategy, which is he wants to increase the tax on things that are produced in China and other countries. And he wants to reduce the tax on things that are made in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Maine and California. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think.
Well, I think
that would create jobs in America. And I'm a free trade guy.
Let me ask you. I mean, I know that you are. The only problem is that there are a lot of things that are not made in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania that Americans want and need. And at the end of the day, there has to be some rationality about where do we get things from that we do not make or cannot make. And I'm not sure that's fit into the picture of tariffs. Kathryn, I wanted to give you another
But you
word
make
on
a
this.
very good point, Abby, and I'll add to that, which is if this is successful, which it can be, you know, it's very binary. This could be an atrocity where it fails miserably and there's a run on the risk-free asset, which is the U.S. Treasury. That could be a very real possibility, especially if we blow out the fiscal deficit with tax cuts. But without accompanying spending cuts. By the way. But it could go very right as well because, you know, we're not at the end of this. India is probably going to be the first trade accord that we agree to. Japan's going to be next. There's inevitably going to be some at least cosmetic bridge with China before we get an ultimate accord there. But I think what the administration is attempting to do is to reduce dependency on external sources, such that we saw in COVID, where we became so vulnerable to imports from overseas, and really rebuild what I think Besant said today, which was precision manufacturing. We're not trying to make widgets again in Ohio, but we are trying to improve the lot of the average American. And then, of course, we have the issue of national security. So this is not just an economic tool. This is now a national security tool, and I think more broadly,
so what are we going to make
geopolitical?
What would we make in Ohio then, if we're not going to make the widgets? And what are the working class people trained to actually do in Ohio to catch up to Van's point where the robots are actually going to take the job? I think that's the gap where it doesn't feel like this administration is actually, as an Ohioan, delivering for those people.
Okay, Van.
And I think a lot of what you say I agree with, in part because that's what Biden was doing when you talk about the CHIPS Act, when you talk about a lot of the investment. So there is a consensus that we want to have less dependence on China in general. We definitely want to build more stuff that we need here. But there's a smart way and a dumb way to do anything. A tariff a day keeps prosperity away. I don't understand all the craziness, the back and the forth, and then somebody gives you a phone call, you change your whole thing the next day. That is not the right way to run a bodega, let alone the only hyperpower left in the world.
You asked, when you were asking Ashley and I a question, you framed it around the politics of this. Sure, the president's numbers have decreased. I'm sure the president is aware of that, and sure are his advisors. But when you also look at those same polling data, and you go underneath and you ask, when you look up the voters' responses, whereas it pertains to Democrats, there wasn't significant confidence that Democrats somehow had a magical answer to improve the economic.
I agree. Hey, listen, that's a different segment.
So I just wanted to throw that out there. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Since you brought it up, Michael, we will, in fact, be talking about that. And you're right. Just because voters are unhappy with what Trump's doing doesn't mean that they're happy with the other party. But I don't know that that actually helps Republicans in this particular moment. But we have more on that topic as we continue on with the show. Kathryn Rooney Vera, thank you very much for joining us. Everyone else.